It seems that shooting people in the neck with scoped rifles is quite the trending subject in America these days. So that's why today we're going to make a sniper scope in Blender. And I'm going to try and keep this beginner friendly. But if you want to learn more about the tools and techniques which you're going to see me use in this video, I explained everything that I ever use in Blender in my Blender Masterclass course. So you can check that out. There's a link in the description. Now let's quit wasting time and let's start the video. So the first thing we want to do here is go to Google Images, type in sniper scope. I picked out this one right here because I liked how it looks, because it's got a lot of interesting details which we can make in the video. And when you click on this link down here, it opens up a new website where you can buy this sniper scope if you want to shoot somebody. And we're just going to get a couple of reference images here to help us out in the modeling process. For example, we're going to use this thing here as a background image just so we can roughly decide on the size of the object in Blender. We can also figure out the proportions right. We can set everything up correctly. So we're going to take this image right here. We're going to save that to our computer, and that way when I have it in my computer I can just load it into Blender as a background reference, and we're going to be able to use that there. And as usual, we're going to pull out PureRef, and we're just going to copy paste a few more of these images here into PureRef. And if you don't have PureRef, you just go to Google, you type in PureRef, you're going to find a download link over here. You can just scroll down, you're going to be able to download it completely for free if you set this here to 0, which I know you will. So once we got our reference images gathered, we got our PureRef over here. We're going to put that in the corner up here at the top. I usually keep these on my second screen if I'm not making a video, and if you have a second screen you probably want to do the same because it's not going to be in the way of anything. But if you don't have a second screen, you just throw that shit in the corner up here so it's not bothering you. This is the outliner, which we're probably not going to need, at least for now, so we can just keep it out here and it's not going to bother us at all. And then to set up the background reference image, we're going to press 1 on the number pad to go to front view. And now when we're in front view, we press Shift A to add a new object. You go down here to the image section, you click on reference here, and then you can just use this browser here to find the picture which you downloaded from Google. So that's this one right here. We're going to throw that into our scene. When I use background images, I like to make them a little bit transparent just so I can see things a little bit better. So when you select this object, you can go down here to object data properties. You check opacity, you turn that down a little bit. So you set that to something like 0.5 or whatever you're comfortable with. And you also pull it backwards on the y-axis, so it's around here somewhere. And there you go. Now when we're in front view, we can see roughly how big this sniper scope is supposed to be. We have these pictures up here in the corner. So now we're ready to start modeling. So let's do that. So the first thing that I want to model here is this little hub piece, this thing at the center, which is kind of like a sphere which has been cut off from all sides, and that way we got a circular surface on all sides which allows us to attach a cylinder to every side of this little shape on the inside. So to make that little piece, we're going to start by going Shift A mesh. We're going to add a cube from this mesh menu, and we're going to subdivide that cube, let's say 4 times. That should be enough. That's going to almost turn this cube into a sphere, but not quite. So we have to go down here to the modifier properties tab. We have to apply the subdivision surface modifier, which by the way you can do by hovering over here and pressing Ctrl A. And then we're going to add a cast modifier, which is going to shape this into a perfect sphere. So you go back here to add modifier, you go down to deform, and in the deform section you're going to find the cast modifier, and here you want to set the factor value to 1. That way this takes the shape of a perfect sphere. So now you just apply this modifier and you got yourself a perfect sphere with quads only. The reason we're using this method to create a sphere instead of just adding a UV sphere is because the geometry on this subdivided cube right here is much better than it is on a UV sphere. The geometry here is symmetrical on all sides, so we can create the exact same surface on every side of the sphere, while over here the geometry is a little bit different. We got a circular surface up here at the top, but we don't have a circular surface on the side, so it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more difficult to create the shape that we want to create here. And now to make these circular cuts, we're going to use the Boolean modifier. So with Shift A, we're going to add a couple of cubes. First, let's make sure that this sphere is the right size. So it's supposed to be approximately this size. We're going to place it around here, and then we're going to take our first cube, we're going to lower that to the right area, which is around here somewhere. Then we have to place our 3D cursor into the middle of the sphere and select this cube, and we have to bring it exactly onto the other side of the sphere, so it's down at the bottom. So we're going to set the pivot point to 3D cursor here. And guys, I know that for some of you I might be moving a little bit too quickly. Everybody's got a different pace of working, so I can't really slow it down dead slow, because otherwise the video is going to be 8 hours long. No one's going to watch that shit. So if I am too quick for you, just slow the video down to something like 0.5 speed or something like that, or replay a segment if you didn't understand it properly. I make these videos in a way where they're meant to be watched that way anyway. It's like when you're reading a book, sometimes you got to read a section 3 times, sometimes you got to read very slowly to make sure you understand it properly. It doesn't make sense to dumb it down all the way so a monkey can understand it, and I don't know what everybody's experience level here is. Anyway, let's take this cube, and now there are 3D cursors in the middle. We're going to duplicate it in edit mode with Shift D, and then we rotate it by 180 degrees around the 3D cursor here, so now we can make the cut at the bottom. And then we're also going to move over here to the side where we're going to duplicate these cubes again, and we're going to rotate them around the x-axis by 90 degrees like this. And we want to check inside here to make sure that these little corners here are wide enough. So they look about right to me based on the reference image over here. If you want to make them a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, you can select all these cubes in edit mode and you can change the pivot point to individual origins. And now you can just scale these cubes individually, and that's going to adjust the distance between the circular surfaces over here on the sides, as you can see right now. And we also need a cut in the front and in the back. So we're going to take these two cubes from the top and from the bottom. We're going to rotate them by 90 degrees around the y-axis. Of course, we have to set the pivot point back to 3D cursor to do that properly. And these cubes we're going to slightly scale down because these cuts, I believe, are supposed to be just a little bit smaller than the others. And now we're going to select the sphere. We're going to go to add modifier. We're going to go to the generate section, and in the generate section add a boolean modifier. Make sure that this is set to different so you can use the eyedropper to target these cubes. And when you do that, now these cubes are going to cut this sphere, as you can see right here on the inside. So this looks pretty good. We can apply the boolean modifier now. We can get rid of these cubes. We don't need them anymore. There we go. There's our surface. As you can see, it looks pretty clean. Everything looks pretty nice, but we do have to do a little bit of boolean cleanup over here on the sides. So to do that, we're first going to go over here and select these little edges that look like this. As you can see over here, we have two vertices very close to each other. Same thing over here at the top. You're going to select all those simultaneously, and then once you have them all selected, you got to make sure that your pivot point is set to individual origins, and you're going to scale them all to 0. And once you scale them to 0, you brought them all together. But the problem is that now you have two vertices in one place and a couple of places around this surface here. So to fix that, you're going to select everything. You're going to press M to merge your vertices by distance. That's going to take all the vertices which are very close to each other. It's going to turn them into one vertex. And then of course you want to find the places where you have a couple of n-gons like this one over here. You want to take these vertices and slide them inwards with double G like this. Once you do that, of course, again, you're going to merge your vertices by distance, and just make sure you do that on every part of the sphere. Now this is going to take a while to do properly. You're going to have to do this again and again on every side of this sphere, so it might take you a couple of minutes to do, but without patience you're not going to get very far in life. Instead, they're going to convince you got ADHD, you need to take some fucking drugs. So this 3D modeling shit is a good way to practice your patience and cure the ADHD you got from scrolling fucking TikTok all day. Okay, so once we cleaned everything up, now we're going to select all these circular surfaces here. By the way, a good way to do that is to just select one and press Shift G, select similar area. That's going to select all the faces which have a similar area. Some of them are a little bit smaller than the others, so you might have to select those again manually. And now we want to go ahead and add some smooth shading up here. And as you can see, when we do that, it gives us this shitty shading. So we have to fix that. And we don't want to fix that by just going Control E, mark sharp, because when we do that, these edges become completely sharp. And of course, that doesn't look very realistic at all. So you have to add a little bit of bevels to these edges. So you're going to clear those sharps. Instead, you're going to go Control B. You're going to add a little bevel to these selected edges. You're going to set the number of segments to 2. You're going to set the profile shape value to 1. And then when you use your smooth shading, you can see your edges look a little bit softer. They look a little bit more realistic. So that's a lot better than just marking sharps. And now if you want to, you can also add a subdivision surface modifier to this object to make it a little bit smoother. But we're not going to do that for now. We're just going to keep it the way it is, and maybe we'll add one later when we want to create some nice renders. So that's the first piece, and now we're going to move on to making these little adjustment knobs here. Now this next part is about to get pretty complicated, so I suggest you slow the video down. You're gonna have to replay this shit a couple of times most likely. But now we're gonna create these adjustment knobs on the sniper scope, so pay close attention because this is gonna be pretty tough. First, we're gonna select this hub thing. We're gonna select the reference image. We're gonna hide those. We don't need them right now, so you hide them with H. And then with 7 on the numpad, we're gonna go to top view, and we have to know how many of these ridges we have around one of the adjustment knobs. I already counted them. We got 18. That's important because that tells us how many vertices we're gonna have on the circle which we're about to add. So since we got 18, that means we go Shift A, add a circle which is going to have a number of vertices which is divisible by 18. So we're going to do 18 times 4 to begin with, and now we have 72 vertices. So in edge select mode, you select this entire circle and you go up here to select. You're going to click on checker deselect. That's going to deselect every other edge here, but we need to have 1 in 4 edges selected and the others should be deselected. So down here we're going to set the deselected value to 3. Selected's going to be 1. So now we got 3 deselected, 1 selected, 3 deselected, 1 selected, and so on. We just have to adjust the offset because they're a little bit fucked up right now. So if we set this to something like -1, then the distribution is a little bit better. So now we take these edges which are selected, we scale that down, and that's going to give us the rough shape of these ridges around this adjustment knob. So here's where things get crazy. Now we're going to have to add a cone. So Shift A, mesh cone. And right now we got 72 vertices on this object, which means our cone has to have more than that. I want to have 8 vertices per edge. So I'm going to do 72 multiplied by 8. That gives me 576 edges, so that's pretty good. And just to keep things a little bit more organized, let's take this point, we're going to lower it down a little bit to somewhere around here. And we're going to make sure that this cone is bigger than the shape which we just created over here on the outside. Now before we continue, we have to do a little bit of rotation. So in object mode, select the cone, select this shape on the inside. We want to rotate it so that we don't have this vertex aligned with the y-axis at the top. We want to rotate it so we have an edge like this. And to do that, we can just rotate it by minus 7.5 degrees. That gives us an edge up here. So now we can start carving this shape into the cylinder. Not the cylinder, but the cone, whatever. Now before we do that, let's go to side view, and we have to use our knife cut tool on this cone. So press K to activate the knife tool. You're going to click around here somewhere close to the top. Then you're going to press X to cut along the x-axis, and also press C to cut through. So you also cut the edges which are hidden behind the geometry which is facing us. We want to have a cut all the way around this cone. So we're going to click over here on the other side, hit enter to confirm that. So now we get this loop cut around the top, and that just allows us to easily create new loop cuts outside of this area. If we didn't have this loop cut, it would be impossible to add loop cuts around this cone. That's because we have triangles, and then Blender doesn't know how to do loop cuts properly when you don't have proper quads only geometry. So now let's add one loop cut, which is going to be just around here somewhere, and then another one out here near the outside. And it's very important that you don't fuck up the shape of this cone. So you want to make sure that the cone remains intact. No matter how much we cut it for now with loop cuts and the knife cut, the cone still has to have a cone shape. So you don't want to see something like this where you have a busted up surface at the bottom. It has to be a perfect cone. So make sure you don't fuck that up. So let's go back to top view, and now we're going to do a little bit more cutting. I actually want to bring this loop cut a little bit closer to the inside because I don't want my ridges to be so deep. I want to make it so that this vertex here aligns with the edge. So we got the top surface, and then we got 2 more edges on the inside here before we go from the corner to this point right here. And then it's up to you where you want to make these cuts. I'm going to start mine right here. So I'm going to press K, start my cut at this point, and then I'm going to bring it somewhere to, let's say, around here. So confirm that cut, hit enter, then do the same thing over here on the other side. So K to cut, click right here, and then bring it all the way to the outside right there. Click enter. You can even take this a step further, so you can cut one vertex further inwards like this. So now we don't have 2 edges up here, we have 3. And let's do the same thing over here on the other side. So like I said, it's up to you how you want to do this. You can take it a little bit further over here at the bottom if you want to. You can have this circle further out before you do your knife cuts and so on. And now once we have this one ridge completed, now we're going to delete the face segment on the outside. We're also going to delete these faces over here on the outside of this ridge. Same thing on the other side like this. So select the faces and delete them. As a matter of fact, you're going to select the vertices which are on the outside of this ridge. So you want to find the middle, that's this vertex here. Control right click to select your way up on top of this ridge, bring it over to the other side, then select the vertex in the middle on the other side. You want to have only those vertices selected plus the vertex which is on top of the cylinder. So this one right here. Again, not the cylinder, the fucking cone. So once you have those vertices selected, you're going to press Control I to invert your selection. And with X, you're going to delete all the other vertices except the ones which we had selected here initially. Then you want to place your 3D cursor onto this vertex at the top. That's the middle of the cone. And all this geometry here is still on the surface of the cone which we had before. So now select this little segment, go to top view, and now you're going to use your Alt-E spin tool. So now you're going to press Alt-E spin. That extrudes this segment and it arranges it into a circle. You want to check use duplicates here, so they're not extruded, they're just duplicated and arranged in a circle. And you also want to set the number of steps here to 18 because we have 18 ridges, right? And once we do that, now you want to select everything and you want to connect them by pressing M merge by distance. And while your 3D cursor is still at this vertex up here at the point of the cone, you can select this outer segment, extrude that, right click, scale that down towards the 3D cursor, and that's going to form a new cone. Of course, our normals are a little bit busted up, so you're going to correct those with Shift N, and then go back to side view. We don't want to have these jagged edges up here. We want to have a nice clean circle. So to fix that, we're just going to use another knife cut. So K to cut, you want to cut down here through the middle, X to cut along the X-axis, C to cut through, bring it to the other side, click right here, hit enter, and then we can just delete this segment on the inside, and there you go. You got a beautiful shape for this button up here. And while our 3D cursor is still up here, we still got our pivot point to set the 3D cursor. You can just extend this circle outwards a little bit more. And the reason we have so much geometry on the outside here is so that when we use our subdivision surface modifier, it's going to make these edges here a little bit softer. Now you don't have to use your subdivision surface modifier. Instead, you can just take these vertices, you can slide them back with double G, and then you hold down Alt to slide them outwards the other way. And if you bring them up to around here somewhere, that's already going to make this edge here a little bit softer. So you can see now it looks like that edge is round. You can do the same thing by sliding these vertices inwards just a little bit. Just make sure that if you do that, you do do it equally on all sides, on all these vertices all the way around. I don't want to do all that. I'm just going to use a subdivision surface modifier because that's going to make everything nice and smooth. And I want it to be nice and smooth so I can do some very beautiful close-up renders and it's still going to look nice and smooth and realistic. And by the way, guys, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not paying attention to the polygon count on this model. I don't care if my polygon count is high as fuck. I just want this to look beautiful so I can make some nice renders. So now the rest is pretty simple. We just take this circle up here, we extrude that up a little bit to create this surface over here at the top. We fill that in, then we extrude it inwards to make this part where we got this little nut at the top. It's not a nut, it's a bolt, whatever the fuck it is. I'm not a mechanic. And we're going to extrude this down a little bit. That's going to give us this gap here. We can delete the face at the bottom. And to make that nut, we have to use a circle which has a number of vertices which is divisible by 6 because we have a hexagonal shape on the inside of this nut. So shift A, mesh circle, give me a circle with 6 vertices. So we got a little hexagon on the inside here. And we're going to subdivide that a couple of times so we have enough geometry to form a nice circle on the outside. And then we extrude that, we scale it up, we use our W loop tool circle to turn this into a circle. If you don't have your loop tools active, you got to go up here to edit preferences. You got to go to get extensions. You got to type in loop tools up here. You're going to find them over here. There's going to be an install button. Then you go to add-ons and you have to search loop tools again. And you're going to check this box and that's going to give you a set of tools which is available to me with W loop tools. But if W doesn't do it for you, then in edit mode, you press N to open up this section on the side. You're going to find your edit menu at the bottom and there you go. You got your loop tool circle right there. So now you extrude this hexagon downwards a little bit like this. We actually might want to make a little bevel up here at the top first. So you want to have something like this at the top and then you extrude it down and then you extrude it a little bit further and you scale it down to around this size. Maybe we go face grid fill. If we do a grid fill, we have to set the span here to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 because that's the number of edges we have on one side. No, 8 isn't going to cut it. We have to try something like 16 instead. 16 works a little bit better. Let's also bevel this part a little bit and we want to bevel these here to sharpen them a little bit. And the outside we extrude downwards. We're also going to bevel this part. And again, I do want to use a subdivision surface modifier here. So as you can see, when I add my subdivision surface modifier, it looks pretty. So now we go back to the outside of the adjustment knob. We take this part, we extrude it down. We're going to place the cursor in the middle so we can scale it down to 0 on the Z-axis to make this part flat. Shift N to correct your normals. And then you're going to select this part out here on the outside. You're going to duplicate that, scale it to -1 on the Z-axis to bring it down here as well. And we don't need this edge loop over here, so we can just dissolve edges there. If you want to, you can adjust the thickness of this by selecting everything at the bottom and shifting it up and down. And to finish the adjustment knob, you just extrude this down and that's the little cylinder which has these markings over here. So now we want to select all the sharp edge segments around this adjustment knob. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a bevel there like this. I'm going to uncheck loop slide here because that makes the bevel width a little bit more consistent. And now we go ahead with our subdivision surface modifier. And as you can see, that makes this whole part look pretty nice. And now we can press Alt H to bring back this central hub that we made here before. We want to attach this to the hub, but first we got to make sure that the origin point of this object is on the bottom down here. So I'm going to take this bolt, I'm going to attach it to this outer object here with Control J, and then I'll select this edge loop at the bottom, Shift S cursor to select it. And in object mode, once we have our 3D cursor down here, we're going to go up to the object menu, go to set origin and click on origin to 3D cursor. And now the origin is down here at the bottom. So now if we place the 3D cursor on top of this hub here, now in object mode, we can select this. We can go Shift S, selection to cursor, scale it down a little bit, and there we go. The knob is now in place. So that's beautiful. Okay, now let's move over here to the back of the scope. This is the part that you look through. This is the part that touches your eye. Well, it doesn't touch your eye because if it touches your eye, that's how you bust up your fucking eye when you shoot the rifle. But anyway, this is the part which is supposed to be close to your eye. So now we're going to make this piece over here, which is holding the next adjustment knob. And to do that, we first have to know how many vertices we're supposed to have on this cross section right here. And that's important because this part is supposed to be fused together with the central hub. So if we select the central hub and we select this edge segment over here where we used to have a surface, I deleted this circular surface, so we have a hole there now. You can see that if we activate our viewport overlay statistics, it says we have 40 edges selected. So this circle has 40 edges, which means over here we can create a new circle which is going to have 40 vertices. Of course, we're going to scale him down, we're going to rotate him, we're going to pull him backwards to around here somewhere. And then notice how when you look at this part back here, there's this sort of edge here. So that's what we're going to make first. Now, once we extrude this circle and turn it into a little cylinder like this, we're going to take the edge segments from the front and the back and we're going to extrude them, then right click. And now while this extruded area is selected, you're going to press S to scale and then Shift X to exclude the X-axis from the scaling operation because we don't want to scale this along the X-axis. We just want to scale it along the Y and the Z axes like this. So we're just going to bring them inwards a little bit like this, and we're going to pull them apart on the X axis by scaling them up a little. So we want to have something like this, and then we have to delete some faces from the top. So let's select 6 faces over here in the middle at the top. We're going to get rid of them, and then once again we're going to go up here and activate our auto merge vertices tool because we're going to need it now. So you place the 3D cursor onto this vertex right here, and then you extrude this one. You set the pivot point to the 3D cursor, and then you scale this up by, let's say, 33. That's not enough. We got to scale it up by, let's say, 77. And we do the same thing over here on the other side, so that way when we extrude these edges, now they're intersecting over here at the middle, which means they create a new edge. And we have to do the same thing with all these other vertices around here. So just do them one by one, and once you got them all done, then they're all going to be intersecting right at the middle. Make sure you get the last 2 as well, all the way out on the side. You don't have to do this twice. You can just select these edges and mirror them across the 3D cursor if you place the 3D cursor into the middle. And now they're all connecting over here at the middle, so we can just cut off the remaining vertices, the ones that are sticking out here at the top. You're going to get rid of those, and then take these edges and fill them in with faces in between them. Once you fill them in, now we're going to take this edge segment at the top. We're going to bevel that with Control B. We're going to bevel it all the way to the end, so we're going to bring it down to the bottom, and we want to have something that looks like this. So just scroll up, make sure you press C to enable clamping so it doesn't clip through. You're going to turn this into little squares up here at the top surface, and then as always you're going to have to merge your vertices by distance to connect the vertices over here at the base. And then to create this part, we're going to have to make a sort of knife cut. So let's go to front view, and first let's make one knife cut starting over here. So we're going to cut here, C to cut through, and then Z to cut along the Z axis. Then do the same thing out here on the other side, and that's going to allow us to take this edge segment here. We're going to slide that all the way to the end on both sides. By the way, you want to disable your auto merge vertices tool because it's going to fuck something up if you don't disable it. And now we can make the next cut, which is going to be around here somewhere. So let's say we're going to make that this way, and of course we're going to trim this end here, so that leaves us with a nice little angle if we connect these surfaces. I don't want to try to guess what that angle was, so I'm just going to delete the other side, and I'm going to copy this segment and bring it over to the other side using my 3D cursor. So there we go, there's that, and now we just have to fill in the sides here. And here's an easy way to do that. We can just get rid of all these faces that go all the way around the cylinder. We're going to place our 3D cursor onto this vertex, then select this entire arc going from one side to the other. You're going to extrude that and scale it to 0 with Shift X, so you align it with this vertex on the Y and the Z axes. And now you're going to place your cursor at the origin, so that's the middle of the circle. Then you go back to front view. You make sure that this segment here is selected before you go to front view, and then you just have to go Alt E spin. You're going to set the number of steps here to 40 because we had 40 vertices on this circle. We don't want to use duplicates because we want these to be connected. And then once we do that, we just have to take these faces on the inside over here because we don't want those. We have to get rid of them. Now, just to correct the flow, we're going to add a loop cut over here. We're also going to align that loop cut with this vertex in the front, so scale that to 0 with Shift X. You always want to try to avoid having quads which have inner angles of 180 degrees like this right here. So if you do see that, you just want to pull these vertices inwards a little bit, so it's not 180 degrees now, it's something like 120 or whatever. And then once we have this on one side, now we're also going to duplicate that and bring it over to the other side to fill in the gap over here. Merge your vertices by distance, and then try adding a subdivision surface modifier. As you can see, we're almost there. We just have to sharpen the edges a little bit, so we're just going to select these edge loops that go around here, around the sides. So just a little wireframe view to show you what I selected. I selected this area right there. And then we do Control B to bevel. We want to have 2 segments here. We want to have a profile shape value 1, and we're also going to uncheck loop slide because that works a little bit better. So there you go. Now we got this piece up here where we can attach our adjustment knob, and it looks like we're supposed to have a circular hole up here, so let's see what we can do about that. I'm thinking we want to use a circle which we're going to project onto the surface with a shrink wrap modifier, and in this case we're going to use an area on the inside like this. So if we delete some faces on the inside, we get a big hole right here in the middle, and if we select this edge segment, you can see we got 14 edges, which means this circle here is going to have 14 vertices. So we're going to place the cursor in the middle. In object mode, add a new circle with 14 vertices. Now scale that down just a little bit, and in this case we're going to rotate it by 45 degrees or 90 degrees. That way we have an edge on the top and the bottom, and we have vertices over here which can connect with the geometry of this object underneath. So you take that circle in edit mode, you're going to fill it with F, and then you go to add modifier, you're going to go to deform, where you're going to add a shrink wrap modifier. You set the wrap method here to project, and then you target the surface underneath, and now we just have to lower this down to make it project onto the surface. you're going to apply the shrink wrap modifier. Take the circle, take the object underneath, you're going to join them together with Control J, and then we take these two faces for the inside, we're going to delete the vertices there. We have to make some more space, so I'm going to take these edges and slide them outwards a little bit more. Make sure that you slide them evenly on both sides. So first I'm sliding both edges by 3 units and then the middle vertex by another 2. And once we do that, we just have to take the circle, take the surface around it. In edge select mode, we go W bridge edge loops. If W bridge edge loops doesn't work for you, you can also go up here to edge, and here you're going to find the bridge edge loops tool as well. And there you go. Now we got a circle, so we can extrude that down, delete the bottom. It might still be a little bit fucked up, so we're going to take some of the vertices from the sides here. We're going to lift them up a little bit just to improve the flow a bit more. We're also going to take these edges from the sides and we're going to have to lift them up a little bit. And there we go. Now we can bevel this circle and we have a nice, pretty circular hole with no shading artifact. So that's fucking great. Okay, so we got that done. Next, we're going to have to attach this to the rest of the scope by creating this tube, which is going to put everything together. Now we're going to connect this piece here to the central hub, and to do that we're going to go to front view and we're going to start by taking this circle from over here from the side, and we're going to extrude that all the way until it meets this part. So first we extrude it up to around here somewhere, then we extrude it a little bit further and we scale it up a little, and then we extrude it to the end here, but we have to make sure that these are aligned exactly. So to do that, I'm going to place my 3D cursor onto this edge segment on the side here, and now if I set my pivot point to 3D cursor, I can take this, scale it to 0 on the x-axis. Now they're perfectly aligned. So now I take this object, I take the other object, I join them with Control J, and that's going to allow me to bridge these edge loops so that they connect perfectly. Of course, we also want to bevel these edges over here to make them sharp, and then once we have them connected, now we can start working on this adjustment ring here. Now making this adjustment ring is going to be pretty much the same thing as making these adjustment knobs around the hub. It's just a slightly different shape that we have to carve into a cone. So once again, we're going to go to top view, and I'm going to assume that we have 18 ridges here as well. It actually seems like we have a couple more, so maybe I'll go for like 24 and then we're going to see what happens. So for now, let's take the objects that we have so far, we're going to hide them so they're not in the way. We want to do this at the center of the world, and I'm doing it at the center of the world because I have my axes here. So when I add my cone, I can see exactly which edges are perfectly vertical or horizontal here on the sides, and that's going to help me make sure that I can cut this properly. Now the number of vertices we need on this cone is going to have to be a multiple of 24, because I said we want 24 ridges. So we're going to have 24 ridges. We want 4 ridges per edge to begin with, and maybe it's best if we multiply that by 8, so we have 8 edges per ridge. It looks like we might even want more than that, so let's do this multiplied by 2. That gives me 384 edges. And then again, I want to have a loop cut around the cone, so I'm going to use my knife tool from side view to make a horizontal cut here through the cone. Let's also scale the cone down a little bit on the z-axis because we don't need it to be that pointy. Now let's say this is going to be the outer circle, this here is going to be the inner circle, and in this case we can use exactly 16 edges per ridge. So we're going to select 8 edges on this side, and then also another 8 edges on the other side. That gives us 16 edges, so we know that this here is going to be one ridge. So we can just mark seam right there, and this is going to be the top of the ridge, this is going to be the bottom of the ridge, and the gaps have to be a little bit narrower than the outer parts. And it seems like the width of this edge at the top and the width of the gap between these surfaces at the top are exactly the same length. So we're going to want to use 8 edges for the top, and then also 8 edges which are going to be lowered a little bit. So that means I want to select 8 edges over here. We can also mark those as seams, so we know this is the surface at the top. And then we want to do something like this. We're going to make a knife cut, we're going to bring it up to here, and I actually think I want to make this ridge a little bit deeper, so I'll just slide this edge segment a little bit further in. Then we can make the knife cut. You can also join these with J. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. It makes a straight line between these vertices. So you select one vertex, you select the other vertex, you press J to join them, and there we go. Now we just delete everything outside of this ridge here like this. You delete those faces. You can also delete everything else on the cone, but again, you want to make sure that you remember where the point of your cone is. You're going to need that later. Let's bring this edge segment here a little bit closer, and with my 3D cursor placed at where the point of the cone used to be, we're going to select these outer vertices and we're just going to scale them up a little bit. That's just going to make the bottom a little bit softer. So now we can take these edges, we can slide them all the way to the end with double G. We merge our vertices by distance. We get rid of this face segment here, and we go Alt E spin. We want to use duplicates, and the number of steps has to be 24 because we counted 24 ridges. For some reason, when you use the fucking spin tool, it gives you a double on the beginning. I don't know why. We want to get rid of that. And then you merge your vertices by distance, and let's see what happens when we add a subdivision surface modifier. I think it looks pretty good. I still want to make these triangles a little bit softer, so I'll select this outer edge segment. I want to clear the seams on that one. That way I can select all the seams which are left over. So you select one edge which has a seam, you press Shift G, select similar seam. That's going to select all the other edges which have seams on them, not these because we cleared these. And then in vertex select mode, we select and deselect this edge segment at the top. That's going to give us only the points selected, so we can expand those a little bit further by scaling them from the 3D cursor. And we can also press Ctrl+ to expand the selection here, and then again deselect this edge segment at the top, and we can scale everything a little bit further out like this. And here we go. Now I think that turned out pretty well. Again, we just extrude this down, we scale it to 0 on the z-axis. And now the other thing we have to take care of here is this little piece which we have over here. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that does. If somebody knows, let me know in the comments. I know we have all kinds of people watching these videos. We got tank engineers, we got sharpshooters, we got everything you can think of. So I'm looking forward to seeing that fucking paragraph where someone's gonna break this down like they've been shooting people since 1982. But to create this piece, it seems like we're gonna have to close 2 of these ridges. So let's close this one and this one over here at the top. We're gonna delete faces right there, and then we're gonna take these 8 faces from over here. We're gonna have to rotate them by 1/24th, not 1/24th, but 1/48th of the full circle. So we press R to rotate around the z-axis. We rotate it just a little bit, and then in the angle here we type in 360 divided by 48, and that's gonna snap it right here perfectly. Now we also gotta do it again for the other side. This time we want to rotate it by -360 divided by 24, and that fills it up right there. So now we can just bridge these edge loops from the top to the bottom. W bridge edge loops. You slide this till the end, and there we go. Now we closed it. And then once you close it, let's first bring it back into place based on the reference image. We're gonna have to rotate it by -90 degrees. We're gonna scale it down a little bit. We're gonna place it around here somewhere. And I'm doing this so I can figure out how long this backside here is gonna be. So let's just set everything up properly. Alt H to bring back my hidden items. Let's place the cursor over here and snap this to the 3D cursor. And also I want to make this part a little bit sharper. So we're gonna scale this up on the x-axis. We're gonna make the whole thing a little bit bigger, and we're gonna have to extend this a little bit further out. Now if we still had the vertex which served as the reference point for the point of the cone, we could just snap the 3D cursor to that vertex and then just scale this towards the 3D cursor. But we don't have that point, so instead we're gonna select this edge loop at the front. We're gonna do double G to slide, and we're gonna hold down Alt to push it in the other direction, and then we can just press K to start a knife cut on the z-axis, and then we just clear out everything to the left of that knife cut, and here we go. Then we extrude this inwards a little bit, then we extrude it backwards a little bit. We take this edge segment from the back. We're also going to push that back to around here somewhere. And now let me just bring this flat surface into view by rotating this whole thing by 90 degrees. And this surface here is where we're going to make this little thing sticking out. So first let's add a whole bunch of loop cuts here to turn this into little squares. And then we select the surface starting from the side over here, but we got to skip a couple of faces because it's not supposed to go all the way to the end. And we also have a little bit of a gap here on the side. So we want to select everything between this face and the face around here somewhere. And now here's the tricky part. We want to extrude this, but we also got to keep the curvature of the surface underneath. And we also have to cut these sides so that the faces and the sides here are angled. And to do that right, we're going to place the 3D cursor into the middle of the circle, which is the origin point for this object. And then we extrude this surface. We can just scale it up a little bit to around this big. And then from front view and from side view, we're going to make some knife cuts. I think it's going to be better if we only scale them with Shift X, so we don't scale it on the X axis. Then later we're going to be able to use our shear tool to take care of this part in the front and in the back. So only from front view like this, we're going to have to make some knife cuts. So let's start a knife cut down here. And now the other problem that we have to take care of here is that this needs to be pointing upwards. So if you take the average normal line of all these faces, it needs to be aligned with the Z axis. And right now it's not. Right now the average normal line is facing to the side. So to do that, we have to pick a point which is exactly in the middle of this surface. So we take these two vertices, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then we duplicate a random vertex. We snap it to the 3D cursor, and after that we snap the 3D cursor to the world origin, not the world origin but the object origin, and then you extrude that. You scale it to 0 with Shift X so it aligns with the 3D cursor down here. And now this line should be perfectly parallel with the average normal line of all the faces up here. So let's just try to confirm that by extending this line a little bit further up. And then if we take all these faces at the top, we should be able to go to side view, and when we extrude this, you should see that the local Z axis is aligned with this edge, which it is, so that's good. Now there's a couple of different ways to do it. We could use an empty object and align that object with our view while our view is aligned with this edge, and then we take the rotation of that empty object, we parent the adjustment ring to the empty, and we set the rotation of the empty to 0 so it's pointing straight up. That's one way to do this. I don't want to do that right now. Right now we can just adjust this manually if we figure out how many degrees we got to rotate this by, which should be pretty simple because we only got to skip 1, 2, 3, 4 faces here. And if we have a total of 384 faces on the full circle, that means that we can take this and we can rotate it by 360 divided by 384. That's going to be one edge, and then we want to multiply that by 4, so that's going to give us 4 edges which we can skip. And as you can see, when we do that, that's 3.75 degrees, and now it's pointing straight up. And the reason this is so important is because now we can pay close attention to the angles which we're cutting at with our knife tool. So when you initiate a knife cut from here, you can press A to get this sort of ruler thing. It's not a ruler, it's a protractor or whatever you call this thing for measuring angles, and by default it snaps in increments of 30 degrees. So we can use 30 degrees. If you want to change it, you can type in 45, and then it's going to be snapping in increments of 45 45 degrees. You can also type in something like 15 and then it's going to snap in increments of 15 degrees. But for me, 30 works well here, so we're just going to type in the default 30. We're going to cut at this angle. Make sure to cut through, confirm that cut there. Then we're going to do the same thing over here on the other side. So A to activate the ruler. We snap it once to the side over here. We press C to cut through. We confirm that. And then you want to mark both these cuts as seams and also these edges which connect them over here on the side. So when you mark them as seams in face select mode, you can just select this surface, you can select that surface, you can get rid of them. And then we should be able to just select this frame and go to face grid fill. That works perfectly. Same thing out here on the other side, face grid fill. We got an end gone here, so we can take this edge segment and we can slide it up to the top to get rid of the end gone. And if you want to get rid of these triangles down here at the bottom, you just add a loop cut like this. That turns the end into a little quad, and also you just want to slide this inwards a little bit so you don't have an inner angle of 180 degrees. And after that, we also have to angle the sides, and this is going to be a little bit more tricky because here we're going to use our shear tool. The way to do this is you place your 3D cursor onto this vertex at the bottom, you activate your shear tool down here, then you select this entire surface, and you can use this bar here to shift everything in that direction. And as you can see, it works pretty well, but we have a lot of leftover geometry here which we got to do something about as well. Now we could just separate this entire thing into a new object, and then we're going to use our proportional editing with the shear tool. So with your 3D cursor down here with this surface selected, you activate your proportional editing. Let's set the fall off to linear to keep everything clean, and we want our influence circle to be approximately this big. We don't want it to reach half of this object, and we just shear it in this direction by a value of, let's say, 0.5. When you do 0.5, it gives you 45 degrees. I don't know if that's exactly right, but whatever, it's good enough. This one is 30 degrees, this one's 45 degrees. It doesn't really matter. Let's do the same thing one more time over here on the other side. And then if you want to make sure that everything is completely organized, you also want to use your space tool to make sure that all these edges here are even. So you select one segment over here, you go up here to select, you click on select loops, and you click on edge rings. That's going to select all the parallel edge segments, and then you just go W loop tool space. As you can see, that distributes them a little bit better. So now we can just join this object back together with this one. We merge our vertices by distance. We take this edge segment, we take this one down here right next to it, W bridge edge loops. Then we take this one which we had here before and we slide it to the end to get rid of it, and we do the same thing one more time on the other side. So you select the two edge loops, you bridge them, you take this edge segment, you slide it all the way, and you merge your vertices by distance. Now, excuse me for the slightly disruptive change in scenery. I had to change my location, but there's a couple more things we have to do with this piece before we move on. So first, we're going to have to make this little circular hole up here on this surface, and then we're also going to have to bevel the sharp edges so we can apply a subdivision surface modifier so we can make everything look a little bit cuter. So to make the circle, first we're going to go top view, and with our brush select tool C, we're going to scroll down a little bit to make that a little bit bigger. We're going to select a circular surface here. Now, when we select that surface, we delete the faces there, and that allows us to select the edges over here on the inside on this inner segment. Once you select those, you can see over here we got 88 edges. So that means if we go to connect a circle to this hole, that circle is going to have 88 edges. So that's what we're going to do. So let's just undo a couple of steps to before we deleted this circle, and we can just mark all those as seams just so we can remember where this circle was. And we're going to place the 3D cursor into the middle of the circle. In object mode with Shift A, we're going to add another circle, and that new circle object is going to have 88 vertices. Of course, we want to make this circle slightly smaller than this surface which we marked below. And by the way, these are separate objects, but you can edit them simultaneously if you just select them together in object mode and then you press tab. Then you can select the geometry of both of them and work with either one of them. Of course, you can't connect the vertices from the two separate objects to each other, but you can still select them together. So now fill the circle, go to add modifier, go to deform, click on shrink wrap, and then you're going to set the wrap method here to project. Once you set the wrap method to project, you select a target using this eyedropper. You're going to click on this object below, and that allows you to just lower this down on the Z-axis, and it's just going to kind of stick onto the surface like a sticker, but it's still going to retain a perfectly circular shape. So once you do that, you apply this shrink wrap modifier. You join the circle into the object below by selecting the circle, then selecting the object, then pressing Ctrl J. Now we fucked up because we shouldn't have marked all these edges here as seams, because that makes it difficult to select this circle again. We should have just marked the boundary loop as a seam. So now we're just going to manually select these faces here with our box select tool, which is going to take a couple of extra seconds, but that's all right. Still better than getting shot in the head. So now once we select all of these, make sure you don't select the circle in the middle. You delete these faces, then you select the circle, then you select this outer segment here, or maybe you select the outer segment first because for some reason you can't select that if you already got something selected. So you select the outer segment, select the circle, W bridge edge loops. That connects pretty well. As you can see, it looks pretty nice and smooth. So now we just extrude this down and that's it. You might want to slide some of these vertices around a little bit just so you don't have these weird twisted faces here. They might cause you some problems down the line. And now finally we have to bevel all the sharp sharp edges because I want to use the subdivision surface modifier on this object. But as you can see, when we use the subdivision surface modifier, everything gets a little bit too molten. So we got to sharpen these edges a little bit still. And to do that, we're first going to get rid of the subdivision surface modifier, and we're just basically going to select all the sharp edges. So select the circle, select this edge segment in the front, also select the one in the back, then select this edge segment over here and press Shift G, select similar face angle while in edge select mode. That's going to select all the same edges all the way around this ring. And then over here, we got to be a little bit more careful. We have to manually select these edges here. So we have to go around this shape first and select all the edges there. And then we have to take this thing, we have to take this thing in the back. Make sure you don't select an edge loop like this that goes all the way around the object. So when we select the edge segment up here, we can't just do Shift Alt right click because that's going to select this part too. We don't want to bevel that. We just want to take this and then Control right click, select this. Same thing over here on the other side. And now that should be everything. Now here's how you're going to bevel it. You're going to do Control B to add a little bevel. You're going to set the number of segments here to 2. We need profile shape value 1. And then down here under miter outer, we have to change this from sharp to arc. This is really important. And it's important because if you don't do this, then your corners over here are going to look like this. You're going to have this shitty concave polygon. But if you change this from sharp to arc, then it arranges the geometry slightly differently, as you can see here. And now we can take this vertex, join it together with this one with J. And as you can see, now we got our quads here flowing nicely. So that works a little bit better. Same thing over here on this corner, and everything else should be fine. And then when you add your subdivision surface modifier, as you can see now, it behaves a little bit better. So object shade smooth. The reason I wanted the subdivision surface modifier was to make these things here a little bit smoother. As you can see, if we don't have a subdivision surface modifier, you can clearly see the edges if you do close-up shots. And when we add a little bit of subdivision surface, then it looks a million times prettier. So that's better. Okay, so now that's taken care of, and now we're going to make these pieces over here which attach the scope to the rails of the rifle. And this is going to be pretty easy to do. It's definitely going to be easier than all the stuff that we were doing so far with these adjustment knobs. So to create those, we're first going to take this cylinder that we have over here. You're going to duplicate that with Shift D, scale it down a little bit on the X-axis to make it shorter. You want to make this the same width as this object right here. So it's going to be something sort of like this. And we're going to separate that to a new object so we don't accidentally edit the object underneath. So now we have something like this. And now we need more vertices for this object. So first with W, we're going to subdivide this 2 times. Once we subdivide it, we're going to get rid of these edge segments over here because we don't need those. So select them, X dissolve edges. And then we take the 2 circles in the front and in the back, and we're going to use W loop tool circle to turn them into a perfect circle. And now we have some more geometry to work with. So make sure the 3D cursor is in the middle of this cylinder. Extrude right click, you're going to scale it up with Shift X. We just want to add a little bit of width to create this little thicker part that you can see down here. And now let's also go to side view so we can find the exact middle of this cylinder. We're going to select this geometry over here, which is right around the 3D cursor. Control E, mark seam. Now that's red, so we know that's exactly the middle of the cylinder. So we're going to do the same thing over here from top view. We're going to select this geometry. That's going to give us another quarter here. What I meant is that it's going to separate the cylinder into quarters so they become a little bit easier to work with. It also makes it easier to select this part if I want to get rid of it because I might want to use the mirror modifier. In fact, I do want to use the mirror modifier. So add modifier, generate. Down here, you click on mirror, you set that to Y-axis. And now I don't have to do everything twice. I can just do it once on one side and it's going to appear on the other side as well. So we're going to take a couple of faces over here from the side. Let's say we're going to take 5, 6 faces. Maybe give me a few more. So something like this. We're going to extrude those out on the Y-axis. Deselect the edges in the middle, and with our loop tools G-stretch tool, we're going to straighten these out. And then I'll just place the cursor up here so I can scale this down a little bit with Shift X to bring it up at the bottom here. And then we get to the lower area down here where things get a little bit more complicated. So as you can see, we have to extrude this piece, which you can see down here. This is the part that actually holds onto the rails on the rifle. So we place the 3D cursor back into the middle of the cylinder, which is the origin point in my case. And let's see how many faces we want to extrude down here at the bottom. I want something like this. I think that's going to be good. And then extrude, right click, and again scale up with Shift X. We're going to extrude it about this far. And then we have to straighten out this surface at the bottom. So here's how we're going to do that. We have to decide on how many faces we want to use here to extrude this piece on the side. So let's say I want to have 8 faces to do that. Let's try 8 faces. Let's see the thickness of that. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to roll with that. We're going to extrude that down here. And then of course we have to flatten this part here. So we're going to place the cursor onto this vertex in the corner. Select the faces underneath. You're going to scale those to 0 on the Z-axis. And if that gets a little bit too close to these edges up here, then you can also place the cursor over here and scale this down on the Z-axis. Just make sure that if you do that, you do the same thing over there on the other side. inside and the back as well. And then the rest of this operation here is pretty intuitive. We maybe push this down a little bit further, then we extrude it down again. Then we take this face, we get rid of it. And for the sake of geometric consistency, I'm going to place my cursor over here and duplicate this geometry from here and bring it down. Then extrude it and bring it all the way to the bottom. Make sure you delete the faces on the inside over here, which we can't see. And then we want to take this and extrude that a little bit further. Let's bring that to the bottom. We're going to add a loop cut here, and this is where we're going to make this little triangle where we attach everything to the rails. So I don't have a perfect reference or side view for how far in this is supposed to go, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. But let's take this edge from the inside. We're going to tear that with a V, slide it all the way down to the bottom, and do the same thing with this one here. And then you can do the same thing with a couple more edges over here. So let's select 2 or 3 more edges in the front and in the back. We're also going to tear them, slide them down a little bit, and we use our G stretch tool to straighten this part out. So you select the edge, W, loop tools, G stretch. Same thing over here at the top, loop tools, G stretch. And again, we got to make sure we do the same thing over there in the back. And we got this little triangular dent here, but I want to push everything a little bit further down. So I'll just scale it up a little bit on the Z axis. And by the way, notice how this thing here doesn't go as far out as this one up here. So if we draw a line from here, this point is not supposed to reach that line. So we can get rid of this triangle at the end. Instead, we can bring this geometry from the bottom up here to the 3D cursor. So the point is a little bit further inwards. And we also have this extra little step at the bottom. So that's pretty good. And now if you want to keep your shit organized, you probably want to get rid of these circles. So we're going to add a loop cut here. Take the vertices from the ends of this loop cut and just slide them backwards a little bit. Now we got quads only. Same thing at the bottom. Add another loop cut. Slide the vertices inwards. And to fill in this gap, we select the edge loop. We deselect the edges from the sides. W, bridge, edge loops. And there you go. That's it. So as you can see, this stuff is pretty simple now compared to the shit that we had to do before. I don't know if I got the proportions right, but I guess it doesn't really matter too much. Maybe I'll adjust it a little bit more later off camera. Give me some more supporting geometry up here. So my corners here are going to look a little bit nicer when I add my subdivision surface modifier. And now let's do the dirty work up here at the top. We have to create this other piece. And that piece is a little bit easier to make, but we have these circular holes over here, which are going to be kind of tricky. So let's talk about that next. Now to make this next piece, we first have to separate this thing over here so we can select this edge loop and V to tear it. And let's take this entire object up here. We're going to separate that to new object with P. Okay, then we want to bring the 3D cursor onto the point over here so we can extrude a face and align it with the 3D cursor out here. Take this edge segment over here. You're going to slide that out with double G. And now as you can see, we're supposed to have a perfectly straight line here, which goes all the way up to the top. So we select this edge segment. We select everything up until around here somewhere. Same thing in the back on the other side. And then again, we go W, loop tools, G stretch. You probably want to make sure that's set to spread evenly. And once we have that under control, now we just want to make the top surface flat. So we take this, we scale it to 0 on the Z axis. It looks like our angle is a little bit off, so maybe we should scale everything outwards a little bit more. So with my 3D cursor placed up here, I'll select all the faces over here and scale them up by, let's say, 1.1 on the Y axis. Maybe 1.2 is going to do a little bit better. And of course, when I do that, I also have to do something similar down here at the bottom. So I have to bring this out here as well. And then we start getting into the business of having to drill circular holes on a curved surface like this. It's not a curved surface, it's an angled surface, but nonetheless it makes the hole cutting process a little bit more tricky. And the first thing we're going to have to do is once again add some more supporting geometry here so we have some geometric consistency. And that will allow us to create some pretty nice circular holes. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to top view, and in top view we're going to add 2 circles here. But before we do that, we're going to figure out how many edges those circles have to have. So I'm going to select a square surface that looks like this, and this is going to be hole number 1. Then we're going to have hole number 2 next to that, and we're going to inset this with I. We're going to delete the faces on the inside. We're going to count the number of edges around this frame. As you can see here, we got 62 edges. So undo to bring back this surface. Shift A, mesh circle. We're going to add 62 vertices to this circle, and you want to scale that down so it's once again smaller than this inset area, and you want to lift that circle up so it's above this surface here entirely. And then as always, add modifier deform. We're going to add a shrink wrap modifier, wrap method project, get the surface underneath, lower the circle down. Now because of the mathematics behind the shrink wrap modifier, when we lower this all the way down, some of the vertices snap to the bottom somewhere out here. And to fix that, we're going to take this surface here, we're going to separate it to new object with P, and then we get our circle, and we don't target the object that we had before, we target the new surface which we separated. Then everything is nice. As you can see from top view, it's a perfect circle. So apply the modifier, join these two together, get rid of the surface here on the inside, select the circle, select the frame, W bridge edge loops, you can get rid of this segment here because you don't need it, and just join that back into this object underneath. Of course, you want 2 of these, so you're going to select the same surface on the other side and you're going to delete it. Once you delete it, you take this part over here, you bring it over to the other side, and there you go. Now you got 2 circles, and you just got to extrude them and scale them to 0 on the z-axis, lower them to around here somewhere. Looks like we made these circles too big because now they're clipping through this object back here. Now we got to make these screws here. So here's how we're going to make the screws. Place the 2D cursor at the bottom of one of the holes with Shift A. We're going to add a circle with 6 vertices, so that's a hexagon. This is going to be the middle of this screw, so you're going to lift that up to around here somewhere, and you're going to subdivide it a couple of times. So let's subdivide that 1, 2, 3, 4 times. That gives us lots of geometry which we can now use to extrude this outwards and turn it into a perfect circle. And the rest is pretty easy. You extrude that circle down, you take this part from the inside, you extrude that down as well. You extrude it further, you scale it down, then one more time towards the inside, then you go up here to face grid fill. You probably want to bevel these edges over here because you probably do want to use a subdivision surface modifier here as well. Now I don't want this bevel here to be very sharp because as you can see, this is supposed to be a pretty round edge, but there you go. As you can see, it's not rocket science. So now we just bring this over to the other side of this hole, and of course you're going to do the same thing over on the other side of this scope holder. You also want to make sure you bevel all your edges on these 2 objects with Control B, and I'm beveling them all simultaneously to make sure that they all have the same width. If you're curious which edges I beveled, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what I have selected on the skeleton of this object, as you can see over here in my wireframe view. And then when or if I add my subdivision surface modifier, this is going to look very nice and very smooth and very pretty. And now I think we covered everything as far as the modeling goes. I still got to do a couple of these adjustment rings over here in the back, over here at the top, a few more things like a couple of screws down here, but it's nothing really worth spending another 20 minutes of video on. I just know you people are curious about the fucking lens here in the back, so let me show you how you can put that together. Let's just pretend like we have this last adjustment knob over here, so let's just pretend like this is where we're supposed to have our lens. Of course, you want to take this, you want to extrude it inwards just a little bit. And now the way I would do this is the following. First, with Shift A, I would add a cube, and I would subdivide that cube 4 or 5 times with the subdivision surface modifier. Then we apply the subdivision surface modifier. Then again, we use that cast modifier thing to turn this into a perfect sphere. And then we scale this down and we fit it into this hole here. Now, once we do that, we got to get rid of exactly half of this sphere. So we're going to delete one half and we're going to scale the other half down to make it nice and flat like this. Not flat, but you understand what I mean. And then you bring it close to the end, and now you have this smooth surface here. You go to Object, Shade, Smooth. Ideally, you want to run a hole all the way through this object. So you want to take this geometry here and you want to connect it with the geometry on the other end. You want to make sure that's uninterrupted so you can look through this thing. As you can see right now, if I remove my lens, I got a nice tunnel here so we can see through that. So we're going to extrude this backwards until we get to the other side. So we're going to go step by step here. We push it through the middle. Then we bring it over here where we're going to scale it up a little bit to meet this circle out here. And finally, we get back here. So now we got a perfect inner tunnel. I don't know if this is what the inside of a sniper scope looks like, but fuck it, it works for me for now. And now you bring back the lens and the material. Here's the most important part. You're going to go over to your shading tab, and in your shading tab, you're going to add a glass material. Now you have to be in cycles for this to work properly. If you're an EV, the glass material is going to look pretty shitty. It's not going to look anywhere near as good as it does in cycles. So you add a new material, you delete your principled BSDF node, and instead of that, with Shift A, you add a glass BSDF node. You plug that here, and you can see that already behaves like glass in the texture preview. And in rendered view, it still looks like glass, but it doesn't look like what you see when you look through a sniper scope. To fix that, you have to make sure that your back is filled in, so this has to be a solid object. And you probably want to turn up this IOR value over here all the way up until it starts to zoom in a little bit. I don't know if this is how real sniper scopes work. I'm not fucking Galileo, so I don't know how the lenses are arranged inside a scope. I'm just making something that sort of looks like what you see when you look at a picture of a sniper scope. So maybe you also want to add another layer, so you're going to duplicate this lens and bring it back. Maybe you want to also add another one on the other side. Not maybe, but you definitely do. And that's pretty much all we need to make for the sniper scope model. So there you go. I hope you guys learned something new. I want to make another video to talk about how to make these engraved letters, which we have over here on the adjustment knobs. It's a little bit of a process, so I don't think we have time for that shit in this video right now, because otherwise it's going to be 3 hours long. But let me know in the comments if you guys want a video about that. It's a pretty useful technique for this type of stuff. But like the video, subscribe to the fucking channel. Make sure you check out the masterclass course if you want to learn more about Blender. Also, don't forget to join our Blender Discord where you can get some feedback on your work. I do live streams from time to time where I review people's works and portfolios. But that's enough for today, guys, so I'll see you in the next one.